This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant.
This week on the show, ChatGPT turns 2 years old. OpenAI is looking into ads, Elon Musk is suing them yet again, and the Musk-Altman rivalry continues to escalate. Plus, Brian has a new report out on AGI, and Paris, that's me, co-authored a white paper on digital sovereignty. All that and more. But first, Brian, how did you celebrate ChatGPT's big birthday on Saturday?
Well, it really is an occasion to celebrate, isn't it, Paris? We had the whole neighborhood over, you did some barbecue, sort of printed out our funniest ChatGPT stunts, and just...
That sounds so fun, man.
Oh, man, it was the best.
I'm so sad I missed it.
Do you remember when ChatGPT first came out, and whenever you went to any sort of tech related public event, everybody had to the stunt was that they would ask ChatGPT to write their intro for them.
Oh yes, I remember this. It drove me crazy. Yeah.
and you're like, you kind of have to nod along oh yeah, very good. Is it? Well, I thought I would commemorate this 2-year milestone by asking ChatGPT how.
Don't you dare. We're not reading ChatGPT bullshit on this.
I asked it how Brian Merchant would celebrate ChatGPT's second birthday, and I think it's very funny. It says Brian Merchant, author of The One Device and a thoughtful commentator on technology and culture, would likely celebrate ChatGPT's second birthday with a mix of reflection and critique. Number one, it would begin by Merchant might start by acknowledging the remarkable strides ChatGPT has made in natural language processing, especially in terms of its usefulness to a broad audience.
Oh, it knows you so well.
Yeah, I feel like either there's been an intervention here or I have failed. If this is literally what I mean, it's funny because one of the things we're going to talk about today is the new sort of drive to put ads into ChatGPT. This is literally just an ad for ChatGPT, baked into the question that I asked it. So it's also basically just making shit up. I have never celebrated AI's.
What? ChatGPT makes shit up? What are you talking about?
It's something we take for granted, right? It has been around for 2 years, and the hallucinations were something that were going to get fixed right away, according to all of the this was part of the key promise. Yeah, it still makes stuff up, but it's going to be so useful and so powerful that we still need. I feel for most tasks, people who are not skilled with getting the systems to sort of work around their own parameters and really trying to, it's still constantly making shit up. Even now, it really hasn't improved in a material way for most consumers. I'm looking at ChatGPT 4.0 Mini. This is supposed to be one of its best consumer-facing models, and it's just not much better than it was. I dip in, I try it, right? I mean, I don't know. I know you don't. I know you have a hard no, which is good. Good for you. I feel that's...
the listeners get both sides, right? I just say no, and you give it a shot and see what's happening over there. Yeah,
you have to test. I feel it as especially when I
see the tests that everyone else are doing, and so I feel I don't need to engage in that myself.
Yeah, I mean, for any functional, if I'm actually going to do journalism or do that is not about ChatGPT specifically or about an AI model, then I never touch it. I never use it.
Then you use Google Gemini instead, right? Because
right, yeah, no, I use AI Overview. I just copy and paste directly into my articles. Yeah, that's all it is. But did you even know that it was ChatGPT's second birthday?
No. I do remember that it came out on November 30th when you said it, but yeah, it wasn't something that was actively on my radar. I had other things going on over the weekend that were not Thanksgiving.
I think it's interesting, right? That it is I feel if it had been a smashing success and things were going really well, I think we would have seen a lot more fanfare and attempts to sort of boost up the profile, which kind of, now that we sort of were pausing on it for a second, it's kind of funny that we're not, because I think OpenAI and Anthropic, I don't think they really want you looking too hard at how well these models are actually doing, how functional they are for businesses that have paid a lot of money for enterprise contracts. I think we're at a weird place where they're still trying to sort of pump up the hype cycle. They still have their sort of advocates, people like Ethan Mollick, who are writing their, newsletters going rah rah, but it's not really widespread, right? It hasn't permeated like the public, like this. It's not like Google, where something that everybody's using it all the time, where it's foundational, it's widely agreed upon that it is like necessary and functional, and we should be building the future of all technological production around it, which Silicon Valley still is sort of insisting that we do, right?
What are you talking about? My AI overviews are completely essential. But no, like to your point though, I feel like, if we're really thinking about this though, the story that we've had about ChatGPT and about generative AI recently hasn't been the celebratory story, hasn't been, oh, look at the smashing success we've had and look at how well everything is going. It's like peripherally sort of like how these companies are losing a lot of money, OpenAI in particular. I feel like that is a story from like last month or the month before. That one has waned a little bit. But like the story that has been happening over the past few weeks is the story of how these companies are really struggling to make the models any better because they assume that as they kept making the models bigger and bigger and bigger, they would get better and better and better and, continue to fool us in even better and, more useful ways to make us feel that these chatbots are getting closer to the AGI and understanding things like a human and being intelligent and all this like bullshit that we've heard the companies talking about for so long. But actually the story has been because of research and a number of things that were published over the past number of weeks that actually these companies are struggling with this. Their models are not getting better and they're being pushed at this moment to show that they can actually make some money off of these things because the big promises are really not coming true in the way, as you were suggesting, that we were led to believe in those early months after November of 2022.
And because these models are so resource and labor and compute intensive to run. Like this isn't just another piece of software. They're so consumptive on all three of those fronts that they demand more investment. So they demand more buy-in. They demand more story being told about them to maintain this positive and sort of alluring light where this is something that we need. This is the future. They have to keep beating us over the head with it as best they can.
I occasionally see the story that like the AI agents are just around the corner. OpenAI is going to start rolling them out soon. I'm like, give it up. Like, why are you doing the PR work for these companies? Like, this is not what this technology is. Yes, it was sold to us that way. Yes, it was going to be your doctor and your teacher and all this kind of stuff that Sam Altman was saying in the beginning. But like, that is not the story of these companies right now. And if that is like the narrative that is being pushed, then you're really like not paying attention to what is really going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's you're right. It's just that it's a story, and they have to keep, sort of changing the contours and like the specific sort of subject and arc of that story a little bit. I mean, it's worth noting here. I was going to wait a little bit to dig into, but I have this report that I've been working on for a while for the AI Now Institute.
For a while, yeah.
For a while, yeah.
Brian was on my other podcast, Tech Won't Save Us, like what, a few weeks ago now, almost a month ago.
Yeah.
And we were like, the report's just about to come out, and I had to like record a little piece and be like, it's not going to be out by the time this interview goes live.
The nonprofit and academic worlds move a little slower than our podcasting worlds, but it will be out soon.
We're move fast and break things speed. They're the old
disruptors.
Way. Yeah,
we're disruptors. Yeah. But the gist is that I went back and I looked at sort of the founding of OpenAI and the context into which it was founded. And there's a number of interesting things about its genesis. But I think the one that I pulled out is this hewing to the narrative of AGI, an artificial general intelligence that from the beginning was central to OpenAI's mission, even when it was a nonprofit. And that's how it was pulling researchers away from Google. That's how it was sort of getting sort of the tacit interest of investors who were in the room when it was founded, even as a nonprofit, even though it wasn't explicitly for profit, but it was, I attempt to show, very much obviously coded as a potential profit generator down the line. And it relied on sort of this engine, this narrative engine of AGI sort of being a step up from regular AI, which, AI has been around forever. 50 years ago, AI just meant AGI, the way that they're using AGI now, but they have to kind of use new marketing terms. And it's worth noting that AI was born as a marketing term by academics who were just using the coinage to try to get some funding for a summer program. And that's how it was born, like this very explicit sort of coinage to use.
I do love that part of the story, right? Where the term actually comes from, seeing like way back when that they were still like playing this game with us, just in the research network at that point rather than out in the broader public.
Right.
And,
Not going out to VCs and trying to get, billions of dollars. It was just like, well, we better make this thing sound good so people give us money. And it wasn't anything that they were shy about at the time. I think that was McCarthy, who was one of the sort of early AI researchers, and he just like would say that in interviews, like, no, I coined the term, I did it to get some money. We just wanted to pursue the research. But anyways,
they were so much more honest with us back then. Yeah. The good old days. Yeah.
So the report talks about how, we built or they built this narrative around AGI in particular that, it's going to be this sentient or semi-sentient, all-powerful, and notably per OpenAI's explicit coinage, like it can do the economic task of any human. Like that's what they consider AGI on paper. And so when they dropped ChatGPT 2 years ago, it's gone through a lot of evolutions, but it's already highly primed to be a commercial endeavor. But they also know that they don't really need a business model or anything like that when they launch, because the last 10 years up to that point of Silicon Valley with Uber, sustaining losses for a decade before it ever even sort of gets close to making any money, and this 0% interest rate period where cash was just sloshing into startups, it had become clear that you don't need a business model to sort of generate interest, to generate investment. You need a story, and AGI is the ultimate story for Silicon Valley. It's going to create an agent or a technology that can replace any human worker. And what business doesn't want that? They all do. So this is the story. And to this day, I'd say it's kind of waned a little bit. The mileage starts to, get a little bit dubious after you've been saying it for 2 years and it doesn't show up. But I've also charted in the report at some like key points where the fortunes are maybe sagging a little bit.
Don't lose faith, Brian. Don't lose faith. It's coming.
Right,
it's coming.
Oh, we are, ChatGPT has shown sparks of AGI. That's something like researchers literally said at like an opportune time where it could help sort of gin up interest or press attention or investment. And that's kind of where we are now. I wrote over the summer, I was arguing that sort of the AI boom had already kind of peaked. It hadn't burst, but that's starting to look pretty accurate to me. Like, I feel like we have come down a few levels to where, businesses are, kind of openly saying, I don't know if this is really all that accurate. And Business Insider had a good story last month or in October. Maybe it was just last month, but Business Insider had a great story about Copilot, which is running on OpenAI's technology. And Microsoft insiders are saying, like, this really can't do 75% of the stuff that we're promising. It's not looking so good from the inside.
But we're still building it into like absolutely everything we can think of.
Yeah. That's what's so crazy about all this. And that's where you, I think, really begin to understand the power of this AGI construct that literally everyone in Silicon Valley has just kind of, bought, okay, not literally, but almost everybody in Silicon Valley has bought into and is propelling forward. It's in Apple laptops. It's in Apple Intelligence. It's in, Microsoft's productivity software. It's on your phone. It's on your Google search. It's everywhere. And it's just remarkable that it's not passing any like sort of quality assurance tests by, or even ones handed to consumers. There was so much backlash when Google rolled this out on the most public stage imaginable. And it's not like people said, yes, we like that. It's just like, well, I guess we have to deal with this now. And now it's everywhere. It's not even certain that it's going to make money. And our lead story today is how, because of all this, because the enterprise sales maybe aren't what they want it to be, and because it's so expensive to run all these systems and the frontier models, it's putting OpenAI specifically in the hole right now, like $5 billion a year, and they have to plug that gap. So what do? What does Silicon Valley do when they have a hole that big? Drum roll.
Advertising.
Lard some ads on there.
They love it. They need to collect more data on us and target more ads at us and have more servers in order to power all the ad tech. I love it. It's so wild to like think back to the early days of the internet and the early days of Google in particular, right? And I feel like there's like different paths that we could have taken with like, how the internet works, how the internet was commercialized. But I think in part because it comes out of the United States in particular, and because the United States has this experience of like relying on advertising to fund media and all this sort of stuff, that like this was the real driving force of what the internet was going to be and how it was commercialized, and that like went everywhere else. But we have known from the very beginning that this was going to like corrupt aspects of what happened online, going back to that early paper that Sergey Brin and Larry Page wrote when they were still students at Stanford working on the Google search engine as an academic project and not as a major company, where they admitted that adding advertising to this thing was going to, kind of corrupt what they had built, right? Because they were going to end up having to serve the push and the desire of advertising, the need for profits, all these sorts of things. And then, of course, when the company was spun out, when the company was made private, when you had Eric Schmidt come in to start running it like a proper business and see how they were going to make money, of course, ads were introduced. And of course, it was corrupted. And, we have not just seen that very clearly with Google, but with so much of the rest of the internet that has become so dependent on digital advertising that has required building out this vast surveillance apparatus, corporate private surveillance apparatus that needs to collect all this data on us in order to power these things. Like, this is all connected, and the direction that we've gone is so tied up in the business model that is at the base of this. And so then to see OpenAI now pursuing this too, now saying that, okay, we're losing all this money, our chatbot that was going to change the world is not actually changing the world and is just another tech product that, has a lot of influence from Microsoft into it, but we're just trying to become a big tech company of our own, to the degree that we're throwing off the nonprofit status bit by bit, trying to make sure we become a for-profit company. And now reaching the stage where, as you're saying, we're talking about, the second birthday of ChatGPT. OpenAI is not really talking about that very much, but right as that happens, as we get to that milestone, we're starting to get these stories that, oh yeah, we're talking about bringing ads into ChatGPT now and into our generative AI products so that we can actually make any money. Like, that doesn't seem like a celebratory, kind of we won kind of moment. It seems like, we're compromising on this.
Yeah, it feels like a defeat, kind of.
I wouldn't call it a defeat though, because like, they do have power. They do have this huge valuation. They are throwing off the nonprofit status, and they are about to bring in this business model that they hope is going to, start pouring money into their coffers in a way that, we've seen from Facebook and Google and these other companies. Whether it works out, I think, is another question. Whether they have enough user base to actually produce those kind of profits, whether they can make an ad model work, whether the high costs of what they're doing can actually be supported by an ad model. I think those are open questions that I'm sure we'll see more reporting on and we'll be investigating more. But that is, I guess, how I see it.
Yeah, I don't think it's defeat is the wrong term, because as you said, like, it's built into the DNA from the beginning of every sort of, online based tech company that they're selling software, and it's free to use for a lot of people. So it doesn't take a genius to guess that it's going to go to advertising. I do think that they were hoping that the enterprise sales would go better, that more people would be paying for this and would find it useful enough to pay for it, that the app store that like literally nobody talks about, the GPT store, that like I cannot remember the last time I saw an organic mention of that in the wild. Nobody ever mentions that they were going to make their own app store.
We're not going to have any antitrust lawsuits over the GPT store anytime soon.
Google might argue that it's hey, look, they have their GPT store. We're not a monopoly.
Right. Yeah, we're not a monopoly.
Yeah. But it's funny. They are speed running like the life cycle of every tech giant out there, and it is so much thinner. You have folks like Ed Zitron out there who've been like pretty bullish on the fact that it's going to collapse, might not even make it to an IPO, and this is why it doesn't have the sort of monopolization that Google has to rely on. It can't just extract rents. So OpenAI really risks, I feel like, losing its users if it switches to ads. And there are, its service is now fairly indistinguishable for most people to like 3 or 4 other services. And I don't think that it has that degree of loyalty where if ads really, fuck up the experience, that people might just bail. And I think, it's really interesting because like OpenAI may be like the sort of flimsiest company ever to get $150 billion worth of valuation. And it is, as folks like, Ed Zitron argue, at risk of kind of drying up, especially now that it's like facing sort of a full-on attack from Elon Musk and yet another lawsuit. And I'm sure we'll want to talk about that, because now that we have this new sort of pseudo-oligarchic tech and state sort of symbiosis emerging in the Trump-Musk administration that's forthcoming, there's going to be, power wielded in a new way in the tech scene. And Elon Musk hates Sam Altman. It's well known. And it'll be, an open question of to what extent he decides to punish Altman for the slights as he see it. Going back to the point where Musk wanted to be CEO of OpenAI years ago, and Altman sort of won this tiny nonprofit company's allegiance, and sort of they voted for Altman over Musk. And I think that's where all this grievance really stems from ultimately.
Yeah, it's so funny to think about that too, because then, so much of the company has turned on Altman as well, as he has like pursued this commercialization path. Like all those AI safety people, as they call themselves, like have totally been kind of pushed out of the organization or left under their own will because, their attempt at pushing him out failed too.
All the true believers.
Exactly, right? Who, believe in this AGI stuff and all that. But I wanted to add one point to what you were saying, and then we can pick up on the Musk stuff, which is just that when we think about that revenue model, the one piece of it as well, you mentioned the enterprise subscriptions, but the other aspect of that is that if ChatGPT is not working out, if you're not seeing the kind of benefits or the results that OpenAI sold to these companies as what this product was going to be, I think inevitably you're going to start seeing, the cancellation of those enterprise policies, right? The revenue from that enterprise stream decrease. And so that naturally makes an ad model necessary, right? In order to try to bring in the revenue, in order to try to fund this thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that is where they're going. I mean, Altman has been saying that they like desperately need to open up more data centers. They need to get more power to keep training the models to make them better. So they have all these other sunk costs too. And you do have some enterprise customers sort of canceling. There's been a few public ones. I think they're probably at the phase where they can still sell enough new ones. And I think it sounds like, reading between the lines, that their API business, which I think they were counting on being more selling, this technology to other companies so they can build their own bots, has been disappointing. Some of the comments from Sarah Fryer, who's there sort of leading this drive to sort of get into more profitable realms. They're really pushing. And they hired somebody from Instagram to do ads. And I think it is fitting. I mean, everybody knows the word "inshitify" now. Like, there's a reason "inshitify" is like the word of the year from like Merriam-Webster.
Is it really?
They declared it the word of the year in shitification because it's something that at least describes something that everybody recognizes. There's more ads. Digital systems don't work as well as they used to. And ChatGPT's only been around for 2 years, and now it's basically going to inshitify itself, like right off the bat. Even if such a thing is possible, you could argue it's so shitty to begin with.
Yeah,
but
it started in shitified. How could it get worse? Yeah.
To those people, it is. It's pretty wild to look back 2 years of ChatGPT. What's the biggest impact that it's made? I think, if you're being generous, you could say some coders use it to like generate rote code. I'm sure like email marketing people use it to write their emails, which is not something most of us want to see more of in the world. But the biggest impact remains its use in like classrooms and teachers having to deal with, plagiarized homework assignments, and it's being used as as an automatic homework generator. I think that's still to this day its most notorious use case. Again, you have these like fringe business things and maybe some customer service applications where it was infused onto already extant chatbot. Like customer service chatbots were around way before ChatGPT. So maybe it's like being used specifically but it hasn't been transformative in that sector by any stretch of the imagination. It's just been an addition.
And they're still terrible, even with ChatGPT. Yeah.
and they're still terrible. So to sort of wrap up our whole section on ChatGPT's birthday, you can see why they don't really want to have a big triumphant, stab at having a celebration, why they'd rather just kind of put their heads down and, keep making these promises that AGI will emerge eventually. Just trust them, let them build more data centers. And I think that is a good segue to talking about Elon Musk and Sam Altman. And because, Sam Altman has wanted to build more data centers and get more, even they want more nuclear power for this stuff. The 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor famously was commissioned by Microsoft in the service of more AI stuff. But there's all these like points opening up now where, as we just mentioned, like Elon Musk has much more power and his cronies have much more power over sort of making any sort of determinations about sort of state level matters when it comes to technological development. And, I think Elon Musk is already getting pretty comfortable on the pedestal.
First buddy.
He is not going to be shy about wielding power. Again, caveat, as long as this weird relationship lasts. But so the news that just recently broke, I think over the weekend or on Monday, was that Musk has filed his 4th lawsuit against OpenAI. Again, the primary point of contention is that it's departing from the nonprofit status that it was founded as. Elon Musk did give the nonprofit company money and was a co-founder, and Sam Altman sort of has eclipsed him long ago, and he has grievances with that. But he's expanded the lawsuit now, I think tellingly, to include not just OpenAI people, but also Reid Hoffman, who was also, I think, what the first thing I noticed with that name being included in the new lawsuit was that he's a vocal opponent of Trump. So Elon Musk is like bringing into sort of his project to punish OpenAI a very distinct political flavor, I think, from where I'm sitting. And I think it's just, hearkening the beginning of this era where he's wielding power against political and corporate rivals.
And Altman is someone who has positioned himself as more Democrat, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Altman is a registered Democrat. He came out the gates super obsequious to Trump, like a lot of the other Silicon Valley CEOs, but he's a registered Democrat. He didn't endorse Trump. He was very quiet and very neutral. And Musk would love nothing more than to see OpenAI fall apart and then, have Grok or his XAI company sort of pick up the slack. It all seems so ridiculous and so stupid, but it's also a reality where such a thing could happen.
I can't wait for the future where Grok is our AGI overlord, making terrible jokes as it tries to replicate Elon Musk's sense of humor because the coders have, kind of forced that in there.
Have been forced to train it on like Elon Musk tweets, like a Dear Leader AI bot that's like being used to try to replace all the government workers that Musk wants to get rid of with his Doge agency. Yeah, it's...
I'd take the Kim Jong-un chatbot above the Elon Musk chatbot any day.
Well, it's not going to be much different, really. And the other notable name that leapt out to me in the new lawsuit is the new plaintiff, which is Siobhan Zillis, right?
Yeah. Part of his, kind of polygamist cult down in Austin where he's bought these mansions to try to get all of his kids and baby mamas to live together.
Yeah, she's the mother of at least 2 of his kids, right? Or one of his kids.
I've lost count.
Who can keep track?
There's a new one every other week, it seems. Yeah.
But it is just like, to me, it's reflective of everything we talked about last time about this sort of like emerging nexus of just sort of state power getting grafted onto the, more right-wing elements in Silicon Valley who are just willing to sort of step into this new frontier. And it just shows how susceptible I think this model of technological development has been to this very thing all along, right? Like Musk was just able to buy one of the biggest communication networks that exist on the entire planet, and he was just just able to pump it full of conservative propaganda. It helped get a president elected. Now he just owns it. He can do whatever he wants with it. It's just the worst cesspool. It's worse than it's ever been, and it's going to continue to be that way. And there's nothing we can do about it. He owns it. Like the political avenue would be to try to impose some kind of standards or regulation on it. That's a non-starter because we have this staunchly conservative government. So we have this situation where all of our digital infrastructure is owned by a handful of tech monopolies and tech titans. And, again, we argued last week that Blue Sky is like a respite from all that because it reacts to democratic input in a way that no other platform does. But all this is to say, I think this really feeds into the subject matter of your paper that you just wrote, right? Do you want to talk about that for a sec?
Yeah, sure thing. And I would just say the one thing I would add to what you were arguing there, and I agree with pretty much all of it, is I'm just a bit more skeptical maybe, and I think you are too, of this narrative that Twitter actually played a significant role in the election and in kind of, shifting it for Donald Trump. I think it was just beneficial for Musk to frame things that way. And yes, it has become this hotbed of conservatism and, even more kind of extreme right-wing views. But I would be skeptical as to the role that it actually played in getting Trump elected at the end of the day.
I go back and forth. On it just because it is such a useful place for these narratives to be hammered out and then sort of glommed onto.
I can see that part of it.
Yeah, it's not that it's like reaching more people and they're going like, oh, I saw on Twitter and I'm going to go vote.
It's like it's the place where the narrative around the Haitian migrants eating cats and dogs can be formed and then pushed out across the wider right-wing media network.
That's right. And those things were elevated and sort of, boosted because they adhere to Musk's own viewpoint, and the algorithm clearly favors a lot of that stuff. They're not letting anybody really see what's actually going on under the hood. I think most people would agree that it's just like the stuff that's being surfaced is just more violent rhetoric, more misogynist stuff, more masculine coded stuff, more spam, more blue check. And, so it became this intensely sort of Musk coded space. And I think it did have an effect. And I think, like I said, I go back and forth, but to sort of just say like, well, it was just another platform and platforms only have limited sort of ability to sort of reach voters and to like catalyze, any sort of action one way or the other. I don't know. I feel like that also helped us kind of underestimate the extent to which X had been transformed into this place that was very friendly to people who have overtly nationalist and racist tendencies, and they could find each other, they could phone messages, they could just blast shit out there. So yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty ambivalent.
That makes sense though. Like I feel like I'm just always hesitant of the narrative that it's this tech platform that made this real significant material difference, because I feel like too often I see like centrist parties that are losing relevance and losing support say, oh, it was the tech platform that did this, rather than, interrogating the problems and the mistakes with their own campaigns and their politics and why people are turning away from them. And I feel like we've seen that time and again where the influence of tech platforms, whether it's Facebook or, now we see a lot of this directed around TikTok. I feel like often that is exaggerated because it's beneficial for certain interests to exaggerate it, because it kind of shifts the lens and our focus from maybe their own mistakes or the things that they did wrong to be able to say, oh, the tech platforms are causing these negative harms in society, which I agree with. Like, I think that there are, a lot of harms that comes with these platforms that, people will be very familiar with if they are familiar with either of our work, right? But yeah, I feel like I'm just a bit hesitant around allowing that narrative to take hold.
No, I think that stems from a lot of due criticism from the last time Trump was elected, and a lot of people wanted to blame Facebook for spreading misinformation. I would argue that it's different this time. Instead of being a scapegoat, I think you can look at X and say it is a channel for a very sort of well-defined sort of mode of politics. And I think the problem that was, and I agree with the election postmortems a lot, that sort of the Democrats, tent had become so corporatized and so wide that there was barely any politics to speak of. It's just like, we're not the other guy. So you can't really inject any politics into any sort of platform, digital or otherwise, if your message is ultimately so vacuous, if you're not actually standing for anything. But that said, Conversely, you see Musk on here tweeting, nasty memes about immigrants, and like that does fire people up. It's horrible, but it does fire up a number of people. It goes viral. People can interact with it. And I do think that that can sort of catalyze its own form of politics, because you can't say that these things don't matter at all. We spend so much of our time online. We are being influenced by this stuff. I would love to see more study about the more specific ways that messages sort of were transmitted from candidates or news events into the platforms back out to the electorate. And I'm sure we'll get some good work on that stuff. But all that is to say that was like, it's a huge communication platform, and it was colonized by a very specific set of ideas. And now it's going to continue to be used for that as long as Musk is at the helm or still interested in it in this way, and it has an audience. I think it's interesting. It's still shedding audience, right? Like the audience is fleeing. So it could be that this was the point where it had any kind of utility at this scale. I feel like when I go on Twitter now, it is just a shell of what it used to be even a year ago.
Yeah, no, and I think we agree much more than we disagree on this, even though it might sound otherwise. But I think as we've talked this out, like I think it's pretty clear that we're largely on the same page.
Yeah, no, for sure. It is interesting to think about. And I don't think like anybody, again, like they used to make the fire hose sort of available to academics so you could study what was actually happening in Twitter. Researchers and academics used to love Twitter because you got so much, and maybe to a fault, where you could, impose certain trend lines onto it, but it was much more open and parsable. And now it's a morass, and we can sort of extrapolate as to what's going on from what we see.
Well, I think that also kind of feeds into part of what this report, or this white paper that I wrote with a number of colleagues of mine.
Yeah, tell us about your report.
Yeah, I co-authored this white paper called Reclaiming Digital Sovereignty with Cecilia Ricap, Cedric Durand, Paulo Gerbaudo, and Edmilson Parana, who are Latin American and European academics at universities in Europe. And this really came out of, people might remember a few months ago, Twitter or X got banned in Brazil because it wouldn't suspend these accounts who were engaged in pushing like far-right politics and the attempted coup down there. And Elon Musk was like refusing to comply with these Supreme Court orders. And so the platform itself was like just completely blocked in the country for a while, right? And so initially we had like a shorter letter that we put together that was basically just supporting Brazil in defending its sovereignty against someone like Elon Musk, this American tech billionaire, an American tech company that would not abide by the rules of this democratic country and this democratic government, and was saying like, no, we won't follow the things that you expect from us. And to us, that was completely unacceptable, right? And so then we kind of built that into this broader report by bringing together a lot of the people who initially signed that initial open letter, asking for their feedback as to the types of things that should be in this kind of broader policy agenda for what digital sovereignty should look like. And then the five of us kind of brought it all together and put it into something a bit more coherent, right? Rather than just having a bunch of little points. And so, listeners of the show will probably know I'm not an American. I'm a Canadian, so I often come at these issues from a slightly different perspective maybe than, is often the case in the United States, because I'm not just watching what's happening in the United States, but I'm seeing how these American tech companies are often affecting my country, and how comparatively little power that we have to actually force them to follow the rules here, or to make sure that they abide by kind of our social norms and our values, and how the types of things that used to be common in other forms of media, before the internet came along. If you think about public broadcasting or certain regulations that we had on like the types of content that could be produced, or the type of expectations we had around local content production, and all these things are always fought tooth and nail when it comes to the internet. And so what we are really saying with this white paper is to say, listen, what we see right now is the United States really trying to push out this notion that you're either with us or against us, right? The United States and Silicon Valley in particular feel that they're technologically threatened by China, and it feels like we are increasingly being pulled in two directions. Either you're in the Chinese pole or you're in the American pole, right? You're allied with one, but you can't work with both. And to the Americans, this is completely unacceptable. And so at the same time, Silicon Valley is aligning itself with these really far-right governments, or increasingly far-right governments, are pushing out these really right-wing politics that are very abhorrent to a lot of us, not just in the United States, but beyond as well, where often outside the United States, there's far less support for this kind of politics. And there's a lot more kind of public anger and frustration, I think it's fair to say, with a lot of these tech companies and what they're doing. And so what we're trying to say is, what needs to happen is these countries outside of China and the United States need to start working together on a common agenda to think about a different way of approaching digital technology and the politics around digital technology to make sure that those things actually serve us, right? And are not just serving the bottom lines of these major tech companies. And that requires not just being critical of the big tech companies, but actually making sure that our governments are working for us, right? Not to reject this notion that the government should have nothing to do with the internet, but to say, listen, the only kind of source of power that we really have that can challenge these major tech companies, often coming from the United States, is our governments. And so what we need to do is make sure that our governments are making the investments to develop different kinds of technologies, to make sure that we control the digital infrastructure, within our boundaries, within our borders, and to make sure that the platforms we're creating are aligned with the norms and the expectations that we have within our countries and are not just trying to become the next unicorn or whatever. And so basically what we did with this report is put out a whole set of, policy proposals that are aligned with this to make sure technology serves people and the planet, not major American tech companies, and that we actually have some power over our digital destinies in a way that it feels like we don't right now, and that Silicon Valley and the Trump administration want to make sure that we definitely don't have into the future. And so, when you talk about Elon Musk and the power that he wields in this administration and the way that he can wield it against Sam Altman, but also the broader vision that these people have, it's about saying that vision is not one that a lot of Americans support, but it's also not one that a lot of people outside the United States support. And we should have the power to say, we do not want this. We have a different vision for what technology should do for us in our societies and our world. And our government should be working together to realize that instead of just cowering to the Trump administration, to Elon Musk, and to what the United States wants of us.
Yeah, it's a really, really important project. I mean, all around, I think one of the major projects I think that we all have going forward are finding ways to sort of blunt this increasing. I mean, if it's not clear now, if you can't see how top down technological development is in the way that it is built and then deployed around the world, then I don't think you ever will, right? I think this alliance of Musk and Trump just makes it so clear that we have this very anti-democratic mode of technological development that really is built to serve some very narrow interests and to funnel profits upstream. So yeah, I really applaud this effort to try to, form coalitions to fight back with, with government, because you can. I think we forget that there are means of reining these companies in, and with a united front, you can get a lot done. I mean, there's a reason that it's been Canada and Australia that have been able to sort of push back on Google from cannibalizing the news and forcing them to pay up. Well, yeah, sure, the solutions are deeply imperfect. Any democratic solution is. But instead of saying, oh, well, I guess we're just going to let big tech, devour our journalism industry, here's an idea that is aligned with the civic good, that is in the interest of the public, and we're going to, find a policy solution. Imagine that, a policy solution. Let's do that.
So wild.
Yeah, so wild.
I think you're completely right? It's about saying that Brazil shouldn't be doing this on its own. Canada shouldn't be doing this on its own. Australia shouldn't be doing this on its own. Why can't we all come together and see what we have in common and try to work to some common goal here? I feel like that's another thing. We forget that we can take control over technology and make sure that it actually serves us and the people in our societies and the planet as a whole, and is not, as we're seeing with generative AI in these data centers, increasingly causing emissions to soar and despoiling our environments and stuff. But that we can also come together and work on things together, right? I think part of this report is also trying to bring back this notion that through the United Nations, which is a really imperfect institution, countries used to work together a lot more to create these kind of systems that were beneficial to a lot of different people in the planet, instead of just having it dominated by the major powers that exist right now, right? If you think about the Universal Postal Union or the International Telecommunications Union, how, all these countries came together to make sure that these international systems worked, and that it wasn't just the United States setting the rules, but that we were all kind of collectively working on these things together. Or even thinking about the non-aligned movement that existed existed during the Cold War, where you had all these states who were like, we're not going in the Soviet bloc, we're not going in the American bloc, we are going to work together on these things on our own and kind of say, we're not, engaging in this. I think that is some of the inspirations we should be looking to say, we don't need to accept domination by Silicon Valley or domination by Shenzhen. We can do something different, and we can think about technology in a very different way that has very different goals with it. And I think that, especially in this moment, seeing what Donald Trump is doing, seeing how Silicon Valley has completely glommed onto him and made their project his project, I think we need that more than ever. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I just have one question, and that's, why do you hate America?
Well, that's a long answer.
Everybody should check out this paper. When is it dropping?
It's out now. People can go check it out.
Oh.
They can go to my blog, disconnect.blog, and I have a post up there where you can find the link. I think I would just add one more thing to what you were saying there, right? Like, I feel like thinking from the United States, we don't actually often recognize the degree to which the United States really pushes Silicon Valley internationally, right? I'm in Canada, and so we deal with the United States a lot.
You might soon be our 51st state.
Yeah, if Donald Trump gets his way.
Yeah.
Seems. Yeah. But it's like, we passed the news code thing, and, the American government was actually like kind of mad about that, but didn't go too far with it. Then we passed this digital services tax. So this is trying to make, these multinational, often US tech companies actually pay a fair amount of tax up here because of the, kind of schemes that they use to move their tax around and reduce their tax burdens. And the United States, the American diplomats, the American embassy have threatened retaliation against Canada, through the international courts as a result of that, even though many other countries have already done this, right? But because we're right on the doorstep, because we're very visible, because so many of the companies are very dominant and powerful up here, it's like, you can't properly regulate these tech companies. Even when we renegotiated that new NAFTA last time under Trump, there were explicit clauses put in there to make sure that we were limited in the types of tech regulation that we could pass, because, the tech companies got in there, their lobbyists got in there and made sure that the United States included those sorts of things. These are the types of things that really make me angry and really feel like our sovereignty and our ability to pass rules in our own jurisdictions that benefits Canadians is really being restricted by not just the American tech companies, but also what the American government is doing. And so, like, outside the United States, those things are much more like in our focus and in the discussions that we're having than I feel like often get recognized in the United States itself and the policy discussions that happen there.
If you don't like our internet, well, you can build your own.
Maybe we will. Canada tried to do that, like, before the internet. There was this whole, I think it was called Teledon.
Much more polite internet.
Yeah.
I could use that. I could use a polite Canadian internet.
Everyone will be wanting to join.
Yeah.
and then all the American right wingers will get mad and say that we're restricting free speech
because they have no one to yell at. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Well, before our system fully crashes today, we have a few final headlines to keep you all updated about the state of our collective dystopia here and abroad. You want to kick us off here, Paris?
Sure thing. So Reed Albergati, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in Semaphore has reported that there's a new lawsuit from employees that accuses Apple of spying on them via their personal iCloud accounts and non-work devices. I'm sure this is something we'll definitely be paying attention to, but, think of all those narratives about Apple, respecting all of our privacy. It doesn't seem like they're doing that to their employees.
Yeah, Apple has really enjoyed like a reputational boost from sort of touting its privacy stuff. And this is, an interesting little dent in its armor there, or it should be. And yet another sort of example of potential workplace wrongdoing. So we'll definitely be watching to see how that plays out.
We also have a couple new reports about Google's Project Nimbus contract with Israel that has been so much in the focus over the past year. So the New York Times reported that Google had concerns about potential human rights violations connected to Project Nimbus, the $1.2 billion cloud contract, before the deal was signed with Israel in 2021. Related to that, The Intercept has also reported that the contract is subject to an adjusted terms of service, not the usual Google terms of service, and that Google didn't actually take recommendations it sought from the Business for Social Responsibility, a firm that it went to as it was negotiating this sort of thing to make sure that it wasn't going to be in violation of the types of things that it wants to avoid.
And then we have our friend Mark Zuckerberg, who, perhaps seeing the success that Elon Musk has enjoyed by becoming overtly political in favor of Trump, he had dinner with the president-elect at Mar-a-Lago, and a new FT report suggests that Zuckerberg seeks a more active role in tech policy with the administration, hoping to join this new tech oligarchy that is brewing when Trump comes to take office.
Well, we both know that he thinks Donald Trump is a big old badass.
He's a badass now. I mean, this is the way to get in Donald Trump's good graces. You say something that stands out a little bit. You call him a badass. You go to Mar-a-Lago. All the tech CEOs are trying to kiss the ring, but I think Zuckerberg is doing so most successfully, perhaps. Well, he obviously has his own sort of past with Elon Musk, so it'll be interesting to see whether that plays a role in his pathway to power there.
Absolutely. How about closing us out with our final story, Brian?
Yep. And sometimes you just find a story that just crystallizes everything about your emergent dystopia so potently that you can't leave it off. And we have in this perfect such example, jailbots are on the way. There's a prison in Georgia that is demoing AI robots that use facial recognition to monitor inmates to ensure they are where they are supposed to be at all times, according to NPR, which has a piece in which the reporter goes down and watches the robots in action. This is just a trial thing, but they've got a few robots literally patrolling the prison. It's yelling at the inmates to stand back. It's conducting around-the-clock surveillance and sending data back to the tech company that is leasing these things. It has not been approved yet. It's like a trial thing, but we have literal AI-infused panopticons in motion here.
Yeah, I thought the panopticon itself was bad enough, but the AI version, of course, is going to take it to a whole new level, I think.
If we have any solace here, it's that it's almost certainly going to be shittier than the feared panopticon, which, of course, was everybody looking out at each other, policing each other. Now we have a tech company just beaming data in after it looks like R2-D2 or something, apparently. This is just the kind of thing that's only possible if you have AI mania, right? Like you have contracts like this. Obviously, surveillance technologies are no stranger to the prison industrial complex, but you can only imagine like the pitch meeting here where, the warden has heard the AI buzz and some grifty AI startup can capitalize by hyping up a jail bot here.
Yeah. How else can they profit off of the private prison industry and all these people that the United States keeps locked up?
Right. The per minute fees that they charge when inmates call their loved ones were not enough. Now we have actual jail bots running the grounds. It's grim.
Yeah. Well, this is I guess another insight into our tech dystopia. I'm going to have to organize a ChatGPT belated birthday party for me and my friends this weekend because I don't know how we missed it.
Yeah. Maybe we can celebrate the next birthday after there's an uprising and the jail bots are thrown over the side and spreads.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the AIs were going to have their uprising, and so we would just be forced into having mandatory birthday party for that.
Yeah, we all sit around clapping, reading our very own printouts of ChatGPT errata. Yeah,
I love it.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Well, that's another episode from us. System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode. Thanks so much for listening.